A German billionaire mocks his waitress in his native language, calling her the daughter of a maid and an actress in a cheap play. He's absolutely certain she doesn't understand a word. But when Rachel responds in flawless German, revealing she studied philology at Columbia before sacrificing her career for her sick mother, the entire table goes silent. What he doesn't know is that those words will haunt him forever and transform him completely. Stay until the end. This story proves how one moment of courage can change 2 lives. What city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Billionaire mocks waitress in German. Her response leaves him speechless. New York City doesn't forgive when night falls. Among the traffic, the honking and the rush of a city that never sleeps, Rachel Bennett walked briskly down the sidewalk, holding her backpack with one hand and her coat with the other. It was 7:30 p.m., and she had barely 15 minutes left to clock in for her shift at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan's Upper East Side. The cold wind hit her cheeks, but what weighed most wasn't the weather, but the message she had just received. Her brother Ethan had been suspended from school for non-payment. Her mother, sick for months, couldn't work, and Rachel was the sole breadwinner at home. That night she couldn't afford to make mistakes. "You're late," the manager growled as soon as she crossed the service door. "You know how the chef gets when there isn't enough staff. Put on your uniform and move." Rachel said nothing, just nodded and headed to the locker room. She took a deep breath as she pulled her hair back into a tight bun. She put on the impeccable apron and looked at herself in the mirror. Dark circles, chapped lips, a smile she only held out of habit, but still she looked dignified. At 8:05, a table of 8 was assigned to her. Foreign clients, men with watches more expensive than her annual salary, tailored suits and looks that evaluated everything around them as if it were never enough. The group leader was unmistakable Nathan Hoffman, owner of a multinational tech chain, magazine cover, billionaire at 38. His severe face and his German accent made him seem more like a general than a businessman. "Guten Abend, meine Herren. Willkommen," Rachel greeted politely, using formal and neutral German, hiding her knowledge of the language behind a professional smile. But Nathan barely looked at her. Instead, he turned to his colleague and said in a low voice, but not low enough, "Look at her, probably the daughter of a maid. How ridiculous." Laughter spread across the table. One of them pretended to cough to disguise it, but most just smiled as if it were a harmless joke. Nathan continued without imagining that every word was understood. "Ich frage mich, wie sie es überhaupt geschafft hat, hier zu arbeiten. Sie sieht aus wie eine Schauspielerin in einem billigen Theaterstück. I wonder how she even managed to work here. She looks like an actress in a cheap play." Rachel felt something burning in her stomach. It wasn't the first time someone underestimated her because of her appearance or her accent. But this time was different. The venom with which that man spoke didn't just come from classism, it came from contempt. She took a deep breath, and then, with a clear voice and impeccable manners, she responded, "Herr Hoffmann, vielleicht sollten Sie Ihre Ausdrucksweise überdenken. Das Wort lächerlich passt eher zu jenen, die urteilen, ohne etwas zu wissen. Mr. Hoffmann, perhaps you should reconsider your way of expressing yourself. The word ridiculous applies more to those who judge without knowing anything." The silence was absolute. Everyone present slowly turned toward her. Nathan looked at her as if he had just seen a ghost. His mouth opened slightly. One of his partners dropped his napkin. No one knew what to say. Rachel continued without losing her composure. "Ich habe 3 Jahre Germanistik an der Columbia studiert, bevor ich es aufgeben musste, meine Familie zu unterstützen. I studied 3 years of German philology at Columbia, before having to leave it to support my family." And then with a faint smile she added, "Aber ich habe nie vergessen, wie man sich ausdrückt. Besonders mit Würde. But I never forgot how to express myself, especially with dignity." Having said this, she turned and withdrew momentarily to give them time to digest what had happened. The table remained motionless. One of the men tried to change the subject. Another looked at his glass with shame. Nathan said nothing for several minutes. The rest of the service passed without incident. No one spoke German again. At the end of the evening, when the group asked for the check, it was Nathan himself who stood up from the table, approached Rachel, who was near the bar, and with a firm voice in halting English, said to her, "Miss Bennett, I apologize for what I said. It was arrogant and stupid. She looked at him without speaking. He nodded, lowering his head slightly. "Thank you for teaching me something tonight." He returned to the table, signed the check, and left a tip equivalent to a month's salary. Then he left without saying another word. Rachel didn't cry, didn't smile, just closed her eyes for a moment, feeling that for once words had returned to her, something the world had taken from her so many times: respect. That night, as she walked back home through the cold streets of the city, her cell phone vibrated with a message from Ethan. "Mom feels a little better. We're waiting for you with soup. Love you." Rachel finally smiled. The night had been hard, but she had won more than a battle. She had recovered her voice, and the echo of that voice had just begun to awaken something in the heart of a man who until then had never been corrected. Rachel thought everything would end there, that strange, humiliating, powerful night would end up being just another anecdote, something she might tell quietly to her children, or if she was lucky, to her language students in a better future. But the city doesn't sleep, and the internet even less. 2 days later, while preparing breakfast for her mother and brother, her phone began to ring non-stop. Calls, messages, social media notifications. At first she thought someone had been in an accident, or that something bad had happened, but it wasn't. Someone had recorded the scene, the exact moment when she responded in perfect German to the magnate Nathan Hoffman. The video, edited with subtitles, was already circulating on several TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. It had thousands of comments, millions of views. "The waitress who humiliated a billionaire," some headlines said. "A queen without a crown," others put. But contrary voices also appeared. What disrespect. What if he wasn't serious? That's not how you treat a customer, even if they're rude. And as occurs in this era where everything is spectacle, Rachel went from being an anonymous young woman to becoming the object of national debate in less than 24 hours. The restaurant didn't take long to react. Her manager called her at noon with a tone of false cordiality. "Rachel, we understand it was a delicate situation, but for now, we think it's best that you take a few days. The restaurant's image is at stake." "Are you suspending me?" she asked, containing her rage. "It's not a suspension. It's a preventive pause." Rachel hung up without responding. She felt a mixture of vertigo and unease. Her act of dignity, her moment of justice, now seemed to be costing her her job. Again, the system seemed to turn to protect the powerful. But that night, when she returned from the pharmacy, she found an envelope on the kitchen table. Her brother Ethan had received it from a messenger. The envelope was thick, fine paper with a gold letterhead, Hoffman Foundation. Rachel opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter in blue ink. "Miss Bennett, I don't know if you will read this. Maybe you hate me. Maybe you don't want to hear from me again. But I still need to write to you. I don't remember the last time someone spoke to me with the firmness and elegance with which you did. I grew up surrounded by orders, expectations, and power. Since I was little, I was taught to see others as obstacles or tools. They never spoke to me about empathy, only about efficiency. I was educated in the best boarding schools in Germany. I surrounded myself with the brightest, but I became cold, arrogant, cruel. That night, when you corrected me in front of my colleagues, you didn't just surprise me. You hurt me, not because of ego, but because I understood that you were right, that I had been living blind for years, believing myself superior. That's why I've created something in your honor, an educational scholarship. I called it the Rachel Bennett Scholarship. It will be for talented young people who, like you, have had to leave their studies for economic reasons. You will be the first beneficiary if you accept it. Attached you will find the details. I hope that someday you will forgive me. With respect, Nathan Hoffman." Rachel left the letter on the table. She didn't cry either. She smiled. She sat in silence, looking at the sheet as if it were a trap, a genuine gesture or a strategy to clean up his image. Several days passed before she decided to read the attached document. It was a clear contract, tuition paid at any university of her choice, monthly economic support, materials included. No public obligation was mentioned. However, when she received a second document by email, she saw what she feared. A public relations campaign proposal with her face at the center, photos, interviews, inspirational stories. That same day, Rachel drafted a response. "Mr. Hoffman, thank you for the letter. I have read it several times. I appreciate your honesty if it is genuine. The scholarship is an opportunity that I couldn't pay for in 1,000 years of tips. However, I have one condition. I do not wish my image to be used for any type of promotion or campaign. This story should not be about you or me, but about what can happen when someone stops being silent. If you can accept that, I will accept the scholarship. If not, continue with your foundation, but leave my name in peace. The response didn't take long to arrive. It was short, also handwritten. Accepted, no cameras, no photos, only education. Thank you for teaching me more than any book. NH. Rachel exhaled forcefully. That night, for the first time in years, she took out her old college backpack, dusted off her language books, and placed a new notebook on the table. Her brother watched her from the door. So you are going to go back to studying? Yes, but not for him or for the scholarship. Why then? Rachel looked at the notebook, then Nathan's letter, and then her brother. Because if a single word can change someone's life, I want to learn to use 1,000. Columbia University had a different air now that Rachel walked through its hallways with her backpack over her shoulder. She was no longer the first semester girl full of dreams and crumpled papers. Now she was a woman with scars, with history, with reasons. Entering the academic world again was not easy. The years away from classrooms had made her distrustful. And although her grades began to stand out from the first quarter, the shadow of doubt always followed her. Of course, with a scholarship from a billionaire, anyone studies, a classmate whispered once, not knowing that Rachel was behind her. She was probably his girlfriend or something, another responded. Rachel just lowered her head and took a deep breath. She didn't have time or energy to prove anything to anyone. Her days were full of classes, homework, taking care of her mother, helping her brother with high school. She slept little, ate when she could, and still remained among the best in the program. The translation and interpretation major was more challenging than she remembered. Learning to pass ideas from one language to another not only required precision, but sensitivity, intuition. It wasn't enough to know words. You had to understand cultures, emotions, intentions. In one of her classes, the professor told them something that stuck with her. A good translator is not one who masters languages. It's one who listens with the soul and speaks with another's heart. That phrase, for some reason, reminded her of Nathan Hoffman. Until that moment, they had not been in contact again. No letters, no messages, no news. Just the scholarship, deposited punctually each month, and the tacit commitment to stay away from each other. But destiny, always restless, had other plans. In the middle of the semester, an international conference on language and power in the 21st century was announced. The main auditorium filled with students, academics, special guests. Rachel arrived early, found a seat in the center row, and opened her notebook ready to take notes. The program advanced as expected. Brilliant presentations, interesting panels, watered-down coffees between talks, until the master of ceremonies announced with a special smile. And now to close this day, we have a very particular guest, businessman, philanthropist and recently committed to educational advancement in Latin America, Mr. Nathan Hoffman. Rachel felt her heart stop for an instant. The auditorium applauded with curiosity. Some knew who he was, others only knew him for his companies. Rachel knew him for his worst moment. Nathan took the stage without a suit, with a simple shirt and no escort. He looked thinner, with somewhat disheveled hair. He wasn't the same arrogant man from the restaurant. He cleared his throat, looked at the audience, and began. "I don't come to talk to you about business," he said with an accent, but in more polished English. "I come to talk to you about something I learned too late, the power of words." Rachel crossed her arms uncomfortably. She wanted to leave, but something stopped her. Maybe the tone of his voice or the way he didn't look at her, as if he knew she was there, but chose not to make her uncomfortable. "All my life I used words as weapons," he continued. "To negotiate, to order, to intimidate. I believed that words were tools of power, not connection, until one day someone spoke to me with a clarity that pierced my arrogance. They didn't yell at me, didn't insult me, just reminded me in my own language what dignity means." The silence was profound. Nathan took a long pause as if measuring each word carefully. "That day I didn't just feel ashamed. I felt small, and it was the best thing that could happen to me." Rachel didn't take notes, just watched him, not out of admiration, but out of curiosity. Would all that be real or just a well-rehearsed speech? Nathan concluded his presentation talking about scholarships, about social projects, about how language can build bridges or raise walls. He never mentioned names, never sought recognition. When he finished, he left without passing through the audience, without taking photos, without signing books. He just greeted with a nod and disappeared through the side exit. Rachel remained seated with the notebook closed on her lap. The echo of his words wouldn't leave her chest. That night, at her small desk, with the old fan buzzing in the corner and her mother asleep on the couch, Rachel wrote a letter, not out of obligation or courtesy, out of necessity. Mr. Hoffman, I heard you today in the auditorium, and I'm not going to lie. It bothered me to know you would be there. But I listened. Every word, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I don't know if you've changed, only you know that. But I can tell you that your words sounded different. Not like an apology, but like a real attempt to be someone better. Thank you, not for the scholarship, but for having learned to listen. I'm doing it too every day. Rachel didn't sign with a last name. Didn't put an address or number. Just folded the sheet and put it in an envelope. The next day she stopped by the dean's office and asked that it be sent through the institutional contact. She didn't expect a response, didn't need one either. That letter wasn't for him, it was for herself. To accept that people sometimes do change, and that words well used can do something more than harm. They can heal. The university theater was full. There were no empty seats, and still several people remained standing in the side aisles, pointing their cell phones at the stage. There were dim lights, a background screen projecting images of indigenous communities, improvised classrooms, faces of women learning to read for the first time. Rachel Bennett walked to the center of the stage without hurry. She was no longer the young woman who trembled when speaking in public, nor the waitress who swallowed insults with clenched fists. Now she was a woman with a firm voice and clear gaze, a professional translator recognized for her work in marginalized areas, for training interpretation teams in hospitals, in shelters, in trials where language could be the difference between justice and oblivion. Her talk was titled The Right to be Understood, and when she began to speak, the silence was absolute. Even knowing what my voice was worth, she said, looking at the audience without papers. I learned to speak languages before learning to defend myself, and it took me years to understand that what is translated is not only what is said, but what is silenced. She spoke for 40 minutes without detours, without adornments, about dignity as a universal language, about the shame of asking for help, about the power of a phrase said in time. She shared anecdotes from her work as an interpreter in areas where no one else wanted to go. And at the end, when it seemed everything was over, someone raised their hand. Professor Bennett, asked a young woman from the audience, do you really believe that a person can change? The question floated in the air. Rachel kept silent for a few seconds, then took the microphone with both hands and responded without looking at anyone in particular. Yes, but not by miracles or punishments. A person changes when they are shown the right mirror and dare to look at themselves without fleeing. Pause. Her eyes settled on an empty point in the auditorium, as if speaking with a ghost from the past. Years ago, someone said things to me that made me feel invisible, and I responded with words I never planned to use. I didn't do it to humiliate. I did it to remind myself that I was no less than anyone, and that person listened. Changed. Not because I transformed them, but because they dared to question themselves. She didn't give names. Didn't need to. Those who knew, knew, and those who didn't, understood anyway. She ended with a simple phrase. Words change lives. Use them with respect. Use them with truth. The applause was long, warm, sincere. Rachel bowed briefly and came down from the stage among hugs and extended hands. Her mother was in the front row with her eyes full of pride. Ethan, now a sociology student, recorded everything from his cell phone with a silly smile he couldn't hide. While signing books and greeting attendees, a girl about 9 years old approached her timidly. She had braided hair and a backpack bigger than her back. Are you the lady who speaks all the languages? She asked in a low voice. Rachel crouched to her height. Not all, but I try to understand people, which is almost the same. The girl looked at her with round eyes. I also want to talk like you to say things that hurt less. Rachel felt her soul knot up. And you're going to do it because you already know the most important thing. What you say can heal. She hugged her carefully and sent her off with a new notebook she had brought to give away. Then she stayed alone for a moment, breathing the warm air of the empty theater. Hundreds of miles away, in a sober office in Hamburg, Germany, a man reviewed educational projects at his oak desk. His hair already showed gray and his suits were less expensive than before. Nathan Hoffman had become one of the main investors in linguistic inclusion programs in Eastern Europe and Latin America. His face no longer appeared in business magazines, but in social impact reports. On the wall in front of his desk hung a discreet light wood frame. Inside, a letter written in black ink and firm handwriting. Thank you. Not for the scholarship, but for having learned to listen. Rachel. No one in the office knew who Rachel was, but he did. And every year, on October 11th, Nathan sent a simple letter, without signature, without letterhead, just a few lines. Today I remembered that night. I'm still listening. Thank you. Rachel never responded. It wasn't necessary. In her talks, in her work, in the words she chose so carefully was her response. That story never came out in the media. There were no public reconciliations, no shared photos, no moving interviews. Just two people who crossed paths by accident and left a silent mark on each other's life. And maybe someday, that girl with the big backpack and black braids would also respond firmly in the language of whoever underestimates her, because some words are not forgotten and some wounds when they heal bloom in other mouths. I hope you enjoyed the story. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, God bless you, and see you in the next story.
Yeah!